Welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into an invisible, modern weapon that's absolutely wreaking havoc across the Middle East right now. We're talking about an electronic phenomenon that's completely blurring the lines between the battlefield and everyday civilian life. And the wildest part? It revolves entirely around a piece of tech you've probably got in your pocket this very second.
To really grasp the scale of this, you gotta consider this absolutely mind-bending mystery. Why in the world are massive commercial ships suddenly appearing right in the middle of the Arabian desert? Just imagine looking at a maritime radar and seeing a colossal cargo vessel, a ship that literally belongs in the middle of the ocean, just, navigating perfectly across dry, arid sand. It sounds totally like science fiction, right? But guys, this is happening right now.
And honestly, it's not just ships. These wild anomalies are popping up everywhere. We're seeing Teslas driving down the streets of Dubai, but their internal navigation? It shows them literally swimming in the Arabian Gulf. We're tracking 300-meter-long ships parked in the desert, or even tracing perfect, impossible circular patterns right on dry land. We're watching commercial flights over Sharjah instantly teleporting on radar all the way to the Oman border, or flying these crazy zigzag patterns that would physically tear an airplane apart in midair. Now, I really want to emphasize this right up front. These bizarre occurrences, they're not just software glitches. No way. They are the severe, real-world side effects of an invisible electronic war.
Okay, moving into Section 1, a brief history of GPS. To really understand how this everyday tech evolved into a modern weapon, we need to quickly look back at where it all started.
So let's look at the timeline. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, actually began back in 1973, and it was created strictly as a military weapon by the U.S. Department of Defense. Fast forward to 1978, and they launched the very first satellite into orbit. But what's really fascinating here is the massive pivot that happened in 1983, following a truly tragic incident where a Korean passenger plane was shot down simply because it accidentally strayed into restricted airspace due to navigation errors. The U.S. decided, okay, we need to open GPS to public use to stop this from ever happening again. However, its true power as a battlefield advantage wasn't fully unleashed until its strategic debut in 1991. And man, during that 1991 Gulf War, this tech changed modern warfare forever. Back then, get this, there were only 16 GPS satellites in orbit. Just 16. But those few satellites allowed U.S. forces to flawlessly navigate through blinding desert dust storms and in the pitch black of night. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces, who didn't have this tech, were completely lost in their own backyard. The U.S. military was able to completely outmaneuver the enemy, precision target bunkers, and take routes that the opposing forces thought were literally impassable. It was a complete game changer.
Which brings us to Section 2, how GPS actually works. Because to understand how the system is being hacked today, we really have to understand the underlying mechanics first.
31. That is the magic number today. Right now, there are exactly 31 active GPS satellites orbiting the Earth, and they are constantly broadcasting radio signals down to us. But here's the catch. You have to keep in mind that they are floating about 20,000 kilometers away out in space. So by the time those signals finally reach your smartphone or your car dashboard, they are incredibly weak.
So you might be wondering, how on earth does a super weak signal from space tell your phone exactly where you're standing? Well, it all comes down to a brilliant mathematical concept called trilateration. Basically, trilateration is just determining a specific location by measuring the distance from 3 or more known points using overlapping circles. Let's break down how this actually plays out in reality.
The whole process is brilliantly simple. Step 1, the satellite doesn't actually send your location down to you. It just sends a highly precise timestamp of exactly when it broadcasts its radio signal. Step 2, your receiver, so your phone, knows that radio waves travel at the speed of light. It calculates the distance based on exactly how long that signal took to arrive. For example, if it took 70 milliseconds, your phone instantly knows the satellite is exactly 21,000 kilometers away. And that creates one massive imaginary circle of everywhere you could possibly be. Finally, step 3. By grabbing these distance circles from 3 or more different satellites, those circles are going to overlap. The exact pinpoint where they all intersect, that's your location. So the absolute crucial takeaway here is this. GPS is not actually about calculating space. It is entirely about calculating time. Time is the absolute most critical variable in this entire equation.
All right, moving into Section 3, jamming versus spoofing. Now that we know time is the secret ingredient here, let's look at how this system gets manipulated to counter threats like GPS-guided weapons, and this comes in 2 distinct flavors.
First up, we've got GPS jamming.
Since that real GPS signal coming all the way from space is so incredibly weak, an Earth-based transmitter can easily overpower it just by blasting out a much stronger radio signal on the exact same frequency. Jamming is basically creating a massive electronic blackout with really powerful noise. It's exactly like someone yelling right next to your ear, so you can't hear your friend talking across the room. Conversely, on the other side, we have GPS spoofing. Instead of sending loud, dumb noise, a spoofing transmitter sends a perfectly valid GPS signal, but, and here's the kicker, it intentionally alters that critical timestamp. So, if jamming is yelling to drown someone out, spoofing is whispering a highly convincing lie directly into their ear.
So, that brings us to a really vital question. Why do modern military forces strongly prefer spoofing over simply creating a jamming blackout? I mean, why go through the trouble of deception instead of just using brute force? Well, this perfectly illustrates the tactical advantage. Think about it. If a military uses jamming, an incoming hostile drone completely loses its signal. It flies blind. And what does a blind drone do? It eventually crashes randomly, which creates this massive, unacceptable risk of it falling right onto residential buildings or civilian infrastructure. But with spoofing, you alter the time data just enough to trick the drone's internal computer into thinking it's slightly off course. You literally trick it into correcting its own path, making it turn left or right. By doing this, militaries can safely redirect these lethal threats completely away from cities, basically steering them out into empty deserts or oceans, where they can be intercepted harmlessly.
Let's jump to Section 4, the invisible danger. Because while this spoofing technique is incredibly effective at saving lives on the battlefield, it creates a truly terrifying ripple effect of collateral damage.
And the real-world impact we're seeing is severe. The minor annoyance, of course, is that rideshare and delivery apps completely fail. Your Uber driver's app thinks they are somehow floating in the ocean. But let's escalate those stakes. Commercial airlines are being heavily affected by this. Pilots rely on ground proximity warning systems, which heavily depend on GPS to tell them if, say, a mountain is straight ahead. If the plane is spoofed, the system might actually think the flight path is totally clear when it's absolutely not. Or worse, a passenger plane might accidentally veer right into an active war zone or a restricted no-fly zone without the pilot ever getting a single warning alarm. And beyond physical transport, there's a massive invisible threat targeting our global financial markets.
Get this. A single 1 millisecond fake timestamp could literally crash the stock market. How is that even possible? Well, modern cryptocurrency and stock markets are run by high-frequency trading bots, right? And these bots execute millions of decisions in fractions of a second. To keep the massive trading ledger perfectly ordered, every single transaction requires a flawless, hyper-precise timestamp derived directly from the atomic clocks inside those GPS satellites. If spoofing alters that time signal by just 1 millisecond, the entire sequential record of trades is ruined, and that has the potential to trigger an automated, catastrophic market crash.
All right, final section. Section 5, the future of warfare. Let's see how all of this builds into an active, ongoing reality, because this isn't just some futuristic theory. It is happening, and the precedent was actually set over a decade ago.
You really have to consider this jaw-dropping incident from back in December 2011 involving the RQ-70 drone. Okay, so a highly classified, top-secret U.S. surveillance drone had taken off from a base in Afghanistan, and while it was flying, Iranian forces successfully used advanced GPS spoofing against it. They essentially fed the drone fake coordinates, convincing its onboard computers that it was smoothly descending and landing right back at its home base. But in reality, it was landing completely intact deep inside Iranian territory. They hijacked one of the world's absolute most advanced drones without firing a single shot, simply by lying to its navigation system.
Which leaves us with this provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. Future wars won't be fought with gunpowder, but with invisible radio waves and data manipulation. We are living in an era right now where manipulating time and space through electronic deception is becoming the ultimate weapon. The victors of tomorrow's conflicts are going to be the ones who master this technology, ensuring they can utilize it without becoming completely enslaved by it. So, what happens when we can no longer trust the invisible signals that run our world? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.